Welcome to Back on the Broomstick,
a modern witch's spoken word grimoire,
where two witchy friends from way back are reconnecting to their pagan roots after a long period of mundanity.
We're rewalking the path of the wise and trying out all the latest spells, rituals, and magical theory in today's witchcraft and pagan practices.
So grab your wand and your incense,
your cauldron and your crystals,
and join us
as we get
Back on the Broomstick.
Hi, and welcome to Back on the Broomstick. In this episode, we're talking about the concept of deity, the god and the goddess in witchcraft. We'll cover several different theories about the gods, as well as our own personal beliefs. We'll also answer the questions, do you need to believe in a god and goddess to be a witch? And are the gods needed in your magical practice? Ready to jump into a divine discussion, I'm Layla.
And ready to talk about my version of deity, I'm Chelle.
Modern witchcraft is a practice and not necessarily a religion for many people.
I'm glad you said that because that's like the first thing people get confused. They think that witchcraft is a religion. Two separate things, people. Two separate things.
Exactly. So in your practice of witchcraft, you may or may not have deities that you work with. Some do, some don't. You do not have to have deities to be a witch. However, in my experience, most witches that I talk to do work with some concept of deity, gods and goddesses in their practice, whether they view them as archetypes or universal forces, as egregores or sentient entities. It all kind of varies. But in a lot of cases, witches work with some concept of deity.
Now, I think this is important because you see a lot on the Instagram and the Facebook about, can you be a Christian witch? Well, yeah, because that's basically going along with exactly what we're saying tonight, except for their version of deity just happens to be different than our version of deity. So if Jesus is who you want to work with in your witchcraft practices, rock on with your bad self. You know, people are like, oh my God, you're a Christian witch? That's not possible. Yeah, it is, and this is why.
Yeah, witchcraft is the practice of magic. It is using your will to change the energies around you. Most people that I find that are witches work with multiple deities from many different pantheons.
Well, and each deity kind of has their own, I don't want to say repertoire, but kind of everybody has their own angle of things. So, maybe this week you need to work with a protection deity, and next week you may need to work with a hearth and home deity, and the week after that maybe a mothering type deity,
Right.
So your need and what your magical working is at that moment could very well dictate the deity that you are utilizing, quote unquote, for your magical working.
And this gets back to like the very basic concept of what is a god or a goddess? Where did these forces come from? And a lot of them came from our ancestors who were trying to figure out what these forces were that they didn't understand and things that they wanted to say thank you for. They wanted to understand and say thank you for sunrises or a good harvest or falling in love, the concept of creating new life or good fortune. And so they basically made like backstories for these energies that they didn't understand. And that's where I think a lot of deity came from. And so if you're looking for that energy, like Chelle said, if you're looking for love, you would look to this concept of love, like say Aphrodite, to bring that into your life. So you're working with that particular aspect of universal energies.
But in that same vein, I always twinge when I see something in a book listed. We'll use Hecate, for example. They have her listed as the goddess of witchcraft. There's a whole bunch of other goddesses listed as the goddess of witchcraft. I don't know if I buy into that, first of all. And second of all, any name you give to deity, in my opinion, is a quote unquote god or goddess of witchcraft.
It's people trying to understand forces that are greater than them. And in order to understand that, we kind of put a name to it. And I guess in Hecate's case, because she's part of magic and she's got this guide and she's the goddess of the crossroads and she kind of looks out for people, maybe because of those qualities, that's where people took it. And that's what we do with deity is we're looking for a relationship with a certain type of energy. You want to be more forceful in your life. You want to be more outspoken. Maybe you want to work with a deity that's maybe a war goddess. Maybe you're looking for the Morrigan. Maybe you need to, to embody some of that really primal strong energy. So you look to a deity that
Has
embodies
this
those
type of,
characteristics.
yeah.
Yeah. And I know when we first started Chelle, one of the things that we did a lot of was we would dedicate to a deity for like a year and a day.
Oh
And
my
we
God, I remember that.
Right? So we would go through this whole thing and we would just pick them, whether we felt we were called to this deity or we just, the name kept popping up or something associated with that deity kept popping up, or we were just interested, or we felt that there was something about that deity we needed in our lives. And so we would have a ritual with the whole coven. We'd dedicate ourselves to that deity and maybe we'd take a name associated with that deity for ourselves for the year and a day. And then we would work with them. We would find out, where did they come from? What's their story? What do they like? What do they not like? We would set up altars to them. We would, give them gifts, give them offerings, and incorporate them into our spells and rituals for that whole year and a day. And that was a really great way to find out a lot about them, about the deity, about the religion, and about yourself too.
I gotta say, that year I spent with Pele was probably the most,
Tumultuous.
I was gonna say, pardon the pun, the most explosive year I had.
Didn't you dye your hair red too at that
I
time?
think I did. When I had a burgundy, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, folks, I had burgundy hair. There are pictures to prove it. But I think that kind of goes along with something we talked about in a previous episode, where it's almost like you're really picking the energies per se and not necessarily the name and personification. The name and the personification come after it. Like I'm looking for a deity of love, or I'm looking for a deity of protection or
Right.
of steadfastness. You're not like, hey, I'm looking for Hestia. What does she do? You know what I mean?
That's not going to be true for all witches because there are some witches who worship deities as part of a religion. And for them, it would be very disrespectful to pull that deity out just for the correspondence that they have. So there are some witches that follow it as a religion, and so they would worship deities based on their religious beliefs. So in that case, it would be just a little bit different. What we're talking about here is more the magical ideation of these deities, more looking at them as universal forces or very strong energies around you as opposed to from a religious perspective. And no matter how much you're studying a deity or looking into that religion or that culture, you always have to be very respectful of where that deity came from, their history, their culture, and everything around that deity. You can't just pick them out because they have one quality that you like. You have to take them as they come with everything involved in that deity.
But for me personally, I gotta say, even though we did that and we tried to immerse ourselves in different deity for a while, I always kept going back to Hecate. I was an OGer with her. I know she's a hot thing on the internet now, but 25 years ago, people were like, "What? Why her?"
She was seen more as a minor goddess until she got this fame as the goddess of witches.
Right. That was more, it was what I aligned with. Now, I might not
Right.
align with a different aspect that was more, I don't know, calm and fun. And, I was kind of more fiery and,
Mm-hmm.
I had to associate myself with that. But before we get on too much of a tangent, we are really focusing here on goddesses. So let's loop this right back around and talk about the gods as well.
Yes, definitely having that balance, especially back in the day. A lot of it was very kind of Wiccan based, and a lot of magic talked about polarity.
You had to have that duality. Yep.
You had to have that balance, the push and the pull, the creation and the destructive force. And in Wicca, in witchcraft at that time, in the 80s, 90s, it was all about the goddess. She
Yeah.
reigned supreme, but God and goddess were supposed to be equal and represented that polarity.
So, like when we were doing things like, say, some of our rituals, there wasn't no, you just call the goddess. It was a god and a goddess. That's because we were very Wiccan based, but we always tried to pair them up appropriately, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it. We're not putting, Zeus with Kali.
Oh,
No, we
wow,
weren't
that would be interesting.
we ain't creating that kind of dinner party here. We would try to, for each ritual or whatever we were doing at the time, we'd try to almost like appropriately pair them up. So we had that duality.
Yes. And what we were really doing without saying it, like we said, God and goddess, but in the community that we were both involved in, that also very often involved a third form, a form that
Right.
was neither one, that was androgynous, that was the all. But in the beginning, we more talked about the energies, the life force, the creation, the destruction. All of the stories, like the Oak King and the Holly King and the
Yeah.
goddess, was all about seasons. It was all about life. It was all about how things change within you, within relationships, and within nature. It was all about what was happening around you
Following that wheel of the year.
and within yourself too, following those forces of your life. You are born, you create life, you create things, create relationships, and then we all eventually die. And so it was honoring those cycles. But at the time, the language we used was God goddess.
Right.
I mean, even now, so let's take Beltane, for example, which is the seems to be the height of the God goddess polarity, where they talk a lot about that. And it can feel very exclusionary to people who maybe don't have, they don't want kids, or they can't have kids, or it doesn't apply to them in any way. And so our community created multiple ways of doing that. We still called it God, goddess, and fool. We had the mysteries, right? But just recently, that's kind of, that wording has even changed. Like they've dropped the God, goddess wording, and they talk more about creative force and like the push pull of the universe. They talk more about the energies themselves without giving it so much a gender, because
Right.
there's so much more to it than just a female and a male. There's so much more to life.
And I think, going back to that pagan community we were involved in, I don't want to think we were cutting edge, but we were cutting edge back then, I mean,
Very inclusive.
speaking of Beltane in particular, I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with, women's mysteries and men's mysteries. And 20 years ago, we came up with a Fool's Mysteries. For those folks who didn't feel either specifically feminine or specifically masculine, there was a third option. And that third option also included children as well. So it was kind of like that fun-loving the fool, the fool card in the tarot deck, you're just taking that leap and moving forward with it. And that was a great group. But I do feel that we were kind of a step ahead of society back then.
Well, even prior to that, the men's mysteries and the women's mysteries, you went to the one you were called to. It did not have to match what you were born physically in. You could go to whichever mystery you felt drawn to. And there was no problem whatsoever. We've said this in episodes before. The very first May Queen, the very first person drawn from the women's mysteries in that community, was a biological male. And that was something that just kind of carried through. They did not care where you went.
You
Some
know what the
people,
best part about that was?
what's that?
Nobody even questioned it. They were like, "Hoorah!"
Yeah, yeah, yay, May Queen, Queen of the May,
Yeah.
woohoo. And it was never an issue. Some people would go to one mystery one year and the next year, and it has never been a problem in that particular community. And that does seem to hold true for a lot of witches and a lot of pagans, whether you're Wiccan or not. We do talk a lot about God and goddess because, again, it's that polarity, that duality, but that encompasses every single part of that range between the two of them.
That's kind of why I like me personally, like that kind of god or goddess line there. Because, you've got the god and goddess, the polarity, the light, the dark, the yin, the yang, I don't want to say the good and the bad because it's not like that, but like that polarizing the
Right.
opposites
Hmm.
and take gender out of it. And everything in this world kind of runs on opposites, like we have to have that yin and yang in a lot of situations in our lives.
You have to have the day and the night. You have to have the
Right.
sun and the moon. You have to
The
have,
summer and the winter. Yep.
yeah, you have to have these things.
And so that's how I look at it.
And that really goes towards how I perceive deity anyways, which is very much an animistic, I guess, point of view. I feel that all of these energies are deity. Like the force of gravity, the force of nature, the crazy chaos that created life on this planet. All of those things, to me, that's what deity is. And we give them names, we give them backstories, we give them characteristics. And so they become kind of an archetype or an egregore. But I don't necessarily feel that they are actual people. I just feel that they're more like the forces of nature.
Energies more than Too many
Yeah,
personifications.
exactly. And so, because we are describing them in our image, we come in all different shapes, sizes, gender expressions, everything. And so too do the gods. Every way that we look and can be, there is a deity for that. There is a
They
god
can
or
look and can be. Yep.
exactly. And deity is us, and it is all of these things, all these forces around us of nature and of life. And we just give it a name and a face so that we can better understand it, in my opinion.
Kind of it doesn't need a name. We need a name.
Yes. Oh, I love that. That's
We
awesome.
need the name.
Yes, we do. You're
They
exactly
don't
right.
need the name. We need the name.
We need the name so that we can better understand that energy and better relate it to ourselves and to our lives and what we want to do with that energy.
But I do like the calling of that duality within
Yes.
rituals for myself. And that duality can be, two warrior bitches for all I care. I'm just looking for that duality. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, and that's where a lot of that energy comes from. Maybe it's the two different sides of yourself. Whether you want to describe that as the masculine side of yourself or the feminine side of yourself, whether it's your shadow self and your light self, it's those parts of us that are different enough to constantly be a little bit battling, but also complementary enough to make them better than they are by themselves.
Let them ebb and flow into the universe succinctly.
The idea of the god and the goddess, these archetypes, are supposed to be better together. They're supposed to encompass the all together, fit the different parts. It says it right in the freaking, for what one lacks, the other shall provide, right? It says it
Right.
right in the,
The great right.
yeah, the great right. For what one lacks, the other shall provide. For together they are greater than, I don't know.
No one is greater than the other. For what one lacks, the other shall provide.
Right.
Oh shit, I don't
Yeah.
remember.
But,
Somebody
anyways,
look
it's
it up.
about being better together, just like us. We're better together too.
We are our version of the great right.
We complement each other. And so those energies can come from anywhere. In the 90s, especially, the idea of having a goddess be not just equal to and out there with a god, but maybe slightly even cooler than the god. That was so fucking empowering at the time. I was like, hell yes, the goddess is here. She's the earth, she's the moon, she's all these fucking cool things. Fuck yes.
Well, I think that had a lot to do with where we were in life then, because
Yeah.
I've been looking into this, not to left turn here for a second, but people keep talking about this resurgence in witchcraft or resurgence in spirituality. I kind of look at it as the next generation has left the founded religions.
Yes.
It's like every generation gets to a point where they leave the founded religions and go to earth-based religions. Back when we did it, our kind of uprising of witchcraft and paganism, our time, it was a big time to focus on the goddess.
As a backlash, like you were saying, to that patriarchal Christian male
Yeah.
dominated everything. It was a big backlash to that.
And I think that's why that the focus was so much on the goddess back then.
Yeah.
Not so much that she was more important than the god per se, but because we were just pissed and finally able to put something above quote unquote God. And
Yeah.
because we could, we would.
And we were finally able to say there is magic and power in creating life. There's magic and power in feminine energy, however it's expressed. And that everyone can claim that. Everyone can claim that feminine energy. It should not be less than.
And I just think a lot of people think that they've spent so much of their life either wanting to or being forced to focus on quote unquote God that they're kind of over it for now and want to focus on just the goddess.
Yeah, especially in the 90s, it was very much that. But
Yep.
now we've kind of moved past the need to have God, goddess, and we again talk more about the universal energies that are behind
Well,
them.
because we've evolved to the next generation
Exactly.
who is shedding their founded religions, which is evolving the verbiage and all of that we're used to.
Absolutely. And I love it because I do love claiming all sides of myself. I do love that the people that I know that don't have a womb to represent the chalice of the goddess don't need to feel left out when we talk about these energies. And I don't want to be broken down to just my reproductive capabilities. There's more to me than that. Maybe especially now as we are leaving the mother stage of the maiden mother crone,
Boo.
right? There's got to be more to it than that. Like the dudes get, what is it? The sun, the warrior, and the sage. I think there should be like more of a universal thing like that because I am more than a maiden, a mother, and a crone. What if I never wanted to be a mother?
And that is why you and I are fans of the fourth face of the goddess, maiden, mother, warrior, crone. We are in our warrior phase.
Things are evolving past the need to describe everything by your reproductive capabilities or lack thereof. There's more to us than that. And I love that we are embracing these energies of deity, of God and goddess, as more than just their gender. There's so
Right.
much, they're the energies, there's this life. If you want to be wild and free and more connected to the earth, you can call Cernunnos, the horned god of the wood, and you can feel more of that energy. It doesn't matter what kind of god or goddess you need. You're looking to the energy behind them, the energy
Right.
that powers them.
You're looking for their attributes, not their specific gender.
So the polarity is great, but like Chelle said, you can have, two badass goddesses have polarity. Maybe you have
You can have two badass gods have polarity.
exactly, maybe you're looking to, maybe you're in college or maybe your job is very cerebral and you need one god to give you this, I can focus and be creative and do this type of work. And then another god that's very forceful and I can be strong and outspoken in meetings. You still have that duality.
I see a Pan and Cernunnos ritual coming.
Now that sounds like a good time.
Right.
But yeah, so you're looking to the energies. You don't so much have to have a god and a goddess if you're looking for that balance. You can find that balance in the energies that they represent. Gender doesn't have to enter into it at all.
And I think that's maybe the biggest point we want folks to take away from this today is that it isn't just because they're called gods and they're called goddesses doesn't necessarily mean they have to fit into that gender box. It's like we always say, take what works for you and roll with it.
And there are people that believe these energies are truly energies embodied in some type of celestial being. That is the way that some people perceive them. That's how they come through to certain witches and magical people. They've been called upon and worked with so much, these energies, that it almost feels like, I guess egregore is the best way. It's like a creation, like we've created it because we all believe in this energy and in these attributes. It almost becomes an entity of its own, like an energy of its own. Do you know what I'm saying? Like Hecate comes to you. She's an energy, but she's definitely feels like
A person.
her, right? A being,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But at the same time that you say that, do you believe that somewhere out there is a Hecate hanging out and doing her own thing?
Okay. So remember when my kids used to watch nothing but Disney movies?
Yes. Oh gosh, you had the best Disney library of anyone
really
I've ever
did.
met.
But since it's VHS, it's all junk now. So I want to say it might have been Pocahontas that this was in. So it was like Grandmother Willow. Remember Grandmother Willow from Pocahontas?
Mhm.
So like this whole thing was lit up with fireflies, and the fireflies kind of formed one shape. And then I don't remember what happened. That was a long time ago. Either a bird chirped or something happened, and the fireflies all scattered, and it went from what looked like one being, one shape, to millions.
Mhm.
And that's almost kind of how I look at deity, is almost like all these things come back together and create one thing and then splits into a gazillion pieces as we need those attributes. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? The visual does in my head.
It's perfect. I absolutely love how you explained that because that's exactly how I believe it as well. I believe that when we call upon these deities, these archetypes, these energies, say I want to talk to Rhiannon, for example, say you're calling upon Rhiannon. She's the goddess of the horses. She's the goddess of the plains and running. I don't know.
All I can think of is Stevie Nicks. She's the goddess of Stevie Nicks, people.
There you go. Okay. So you call upon the goddess of Stevie Nicks and you call her into your circle and you're calling these energies. Just like I love the metaphor, Chelle, of all these pieces, all these things that make up what Rhiannon is to you. come together to form that entity, to form that. The technical term is egregore. It's a something that you have created, a being that you have created out of your ideas. So you create this deity as you call upon them. For each person, that deity will be different. Those
Right.
fireflies, all those individual pieces that you pull together to shape that deity is going to be different based on your understanding.
But if you're looking for that piece about horses and rebirth and fertility, you're going to get that little Rhiannon firefly coming at you.
Absolutely, because these archetypes are around for a reason. These energies are there. They appear in the same. That's why in cultures, these different deities are so much the same. They have different names and slightly different backstories, but their attributes and their ideas can be so very, very similar because these energies exist. The idea of love and creating life, the idea of war and hatred and magic exist. And so, interestingly enough, the deities that we have created around them are very, very similar in a lot of cultures.
So as much as I just told you my whole firefly analogy,
Mm-hmm.
there still is a piece of me that I don't know. I'm a weirdo and have such weird thoughts. But I do sometimes think that there are deities, maybe not everyone, but there are deities that were real people in real life at one time that kind of got that status. And I'll give you a good example. Not that this person is a deity, or to me anyway, but there are some people that look at Mother Teresa as a deity. I get it. I'm with you. I'm on board. But I
Yeah,
also
she did some
know,
kind of bad stuff too.
don't
So,
they all?
yeah,
But
they
she was a
do.
real person. You know
Right.
what I mean? But people, whether we like her or go for it or not, is irrelevant. But some people have elevated her to that status.
The whole idea of sainthood in the Catholic faith, right?
I mean, how many people pray to Saint Michael when they lose shit? Is that the one you pray to when you lose shit?
I don't know.
It might be. But that was a person. You know what I mean? So I think that there are some deities that were people at one point in history that society kind of elevated to deity status. Does that make sense?
I think that gets into a lot of ancestor veneration. I don't necessarily believe in the Catholic version of saints, but I do believe that there are people whose souls maybe or whose energy is very, very good and or very strong. I mean, some people have amazing connections with their ancestors, and when they pray to their ancestors for things to happen, it
Shit
does.
happens.
Exactly, that because they have such a strong connection and their ancestors are such strong souls, they're able to work their will with that ancestor's help. I don't necessarily know if that ancestor has become a god, but like you're saying, say Mother Teresa, who I don't
Well,
love as an
Gandhi.
example.
Gandhi would be another example. Gandhi would be somebody that would be put to deity status, I would think.
That's because everyone knows these names. These names are known around the world. It's not just a family or a person that knows
Right,
them.
right.
That's how a lot of these gods and goddesses, I think, possibly got created in the first place. Maybe it was
But
a
do you see what I'm
person.
saying? At
I
some point in
do.
time, I think maybe not all, but I think some of these deities were real people in history that society kind of elevated for one reason or another, whether I believe it or not. And I just think that like Mother Teresa and Gandhi are the best examples of like actual human beings that I know that are potentially being elevated to that status.
That's an interesting concept because when you talk about these ideas of energies becoming deity, like we want to say thank you for babies being born. So we create a deity around childbirth.
Right.
And we talk about them. Maybe some of that gets mixed up with maybe there was a great midwife that, helped
Right.
birth
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds of babies. And so the concept of this life-giving, birthing goddess gets mixed up with this
A
very real
real human
person.
person. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that energy can get mixed up with the universal energy of life creation, and that gets a name and a face put on it.
Right.
I think a lot of deity probably did come that way. A lot of the folk stories, a lot of these deity stories started as folk stories.
Exactly. And that's definitely along the lines of how I think about deity. I just think that there are some that were kind of created by society. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with
No, I think that's perfectly legitimate. But I feel that we are all part of deity. I think that we are all part of this universal, amazing energy. Just being alive is fucking magical. And the idea that we have thought and sentience and we became creatures that exist on this planet is fucking magical. And I think we are all part of that life force, that deity. I think we are all part of God, goddess, everything. It's in the grass, it's in the animals, it's in the crystals, it's in the herbs, it's in each of us.
So I think that really kind of wraps up my views on deity. Is there anything else that you want to put out there to folks?
If you want to learn a little bit more about the duality of God and goddess, there's a couple books I do recommend. I love Jack Chanick's Queen of All Witcheries.
Oh, I love that book.
Fantastic if you want to get a deep dive into goddess. And Jason Mankey's The Horned God of the Witches. And that will give you a good overall grounding in the God side of it.
Do your research. Layla, put those books in the show notes in case you just missed that. But send us a little note on Facebook or Instagram and tell us what your thoughts on deity are.
Do you have any deities that you particularly like to work with? Let us know that as well. Check out our website, backonthebroomstick.com. Email us, backonthebroomstick@gmail.com. Check out Instagram @backonthebroomstick. We would love to hear from you. And as always, give us some stars, likes, reviews. It really helps the show out. And it makes Chelle and I cackle like little witches.
And by the way, we have an awesome listener who has a Back on the Broomstick Facebook fan page. If you'd like to join that, there's some badass folks on there and we love them. And thanks, guys. So check it out if you haven't already.
That is Back on the Broomstick podcast discussion group on Facebook, run by the lovely and fabulous Helen Jojo.
Love her.
She's amazing. And so is everyone else there. So thank you for joining us on Back on the Broomstick. We will see you next week on Friday for another episode.
Stay wise, stay wicked.
Keep it witchy.